A black single dad felt invisible on a routine flight until a casual mention of his call sign turned the skies into a salute just for him. Marcus Johnson adjusted his seatbelt and leaned back into the worn fabric of seat. 1-2F. The hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin, blending with the quiet murmur of passengers settling in for the flight. He glanced out the window for a moment, watching the last hints of daylight fade over the tarmac. Even though he had flown many times before, each flight felt like a small adventure, and sometimes a test of patience. As a single father, he often found himself rushing from work to home, from meetings to soccer practices, juggling responsibilities that never seemed to end. Tonight was no different. He was flying back home after a week-long business trip, eager to see his daughter Mia, who would be waiting at home with her favorite bedtime story ready. Marcus shifted in his seat and reached for his bag, which he had tucked carefully in the overhead compartment. The bag was light, but it carried more than just clothes and toiletries. Inside were letters Mia had written him, a small toy car she insisted he'd bring back every trip, and a photograph of the two of them from last summer at the park. That photo reminded him why all the long hours, the constant juggling, and the fatigue were worth it. Mia was his anchor, his joy, and his reason for pushing through challenges. The thought of her made him smile, even though he could feel the weariness in his bones from the demanding week around him. Other passengers were chatting, some reading, some dozing off. Flight attendants moved efficiently down the aisles, checking seatbelts and helping people with their bags. Marcus tried to catch their attention when he noticed a small problem. The latch of his overhead compartment seemed a little stuck. He raised his hand politely, hoping someone would notice, but the attendants walked past without acknowledgement. A knot of frustration formed in his stomach, not because he was annoyed, but because he often experienced moments like this, small instances where he felt overlooked, invisible even. It was a familiar feeling, one he had learned to tolerate over the years. He sighed quietly and returned his attention to the window, watching the city lights blur into long streaks as the plane began to taxi. Marcus thought about the week he had just endured. Work had been intense, filled with meetings, deadlines, and endless emails. On top of that, he was constantly worrying about Mia, checking in with her teachers, making sure she was managing her schoolwork, and arranging care when he had to be away. Being a single father was not easy. It required balancing patience, love, discipline, and endless multitasking. Yet, despite the exhaustion, he felt a quiet pride. Not everyone could manage to keep their family together while also excelling in a demanding career, but he was determined to do it as the plane took off. Marcus felt the familiar rush of acceleration and the gentle lifting sensation as they climbed into the sky. He looked around the cabin, noticing the diversity of passengers. Some were families like him. Some were young professionals, and some older travelers enjoying the journey. He wondered about their lives, their stories, and what brought them on this flight. Despite the small feeling of invisibility he had experienced, he reminded himself that this was just a temporary moment. Soon he would be home, greeted by the laughter and excitement of his daughter. That thought kept him calm, even as minor annoyances tried to steal his focus. During the initial quiet of the flight, Marcus tried to relax. He pulled out a small notebook from his bag and jotted down some reminders for the week ahead. Appointments, tasks, things Mia wanted him to do when he returned. Writing helped him organize his thoughts and gave him a sense of control over a life that often felt chaotic. Even in these small moments, he found comfort and purpose. Being a father meant always thinking of someone else before himself, planning for their happiness and ensuring their safety. It was a role he embraced fully, even if it demanded sacrifices in moments of loneliness. At one point, a flight attendant passed by his row again. Marcus caught her eye and politely asked for assistance with the latch. She nodded but moved along without helping, distracted by another passenger. He felt a twinge of disappointment, not because he wanted special treatment, but because being ignored was an experience he knew all too well. Marcus was a tall black man, and throughout his life, he had learned that sometimes people's perceptions were colored by bias, even in simple, everyday interactions. Despite his accomplishments, his service, and his professionalism, there were moments when he was made to feel invisible. This flight was starting to feel like one of those moments, and he tried to shrug it off. He leaned back again, taking a deep breath and letting his thoughts wander to Mia. She would be waiting by the window for him, probably jumping up and down with excitement the moment she saw him. He could almost hear her voice calling his name, see her little hands waving frantically. That mental image warmed his heart and strengthened his resolve to remain patient and composed. Despite the small frustrations of the flight, he reminded himself that life was full of small injustices, but love, family, and purpose could outweigh any temporary slights. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Marcus closed his eyes briefly, listening to the steady rhythm of the engines. He allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection, thinking about the challenges he had overcome as a single parent, a professional, and a man navigating a world that sometimes overlooked him. He had learned resilience, patience, and the importance of holding on to dignity in all situations. This flight, like so many experiences before it, was another test of composure and quiet strength. By the time the initial tension of takeoff subsided, Marcus felt a small sense of relief. He adjusted his seat one last time, reached for his headphones, and prepared to watch a movie. But even as he tried to lose himself in the story on the screen, his mind continued to wander to the small interactions around him, the flight attendants moving past, the passengers settling in, the hum of the airplane. Every detail reminded him that life was a mixture of patience, hope, and perseverance despite the exhaustion, the minor frustrations, and the sense of being overlooked. Marcus felt a quiet determination settle in. He was a father, a protector, and someone who had earned respect through dedication and hard work. The flight was just a small part of his journey, but even in this moment, he carried the weight and pride of his responsibilities. As the plane glided smoothly through the night sky, Marcus Johnson prepared himself for the remainder of the flight, holding on to the thought of his daughter waiting for him, the warm light of home, and the sense of purpose that gave his life meaning. Marcus tried to settle into the rhythm of the flight, but the small annoyances kept creeping in. The overhead lights flickered as the cabin crew moved past him for the third time in 10 minutes, attending to other passengers while his simple requests went unnoticed. He had asked politely for help with his bag, which had shifted slightly in the overhead compartment during takeoff, but no one had come. It was not the kind of situation that would ruin the day, but it was enough to make him feel the familiar sting of being ignored. Marcus had learned to handle such moments with patience, but he could not help noticing how differently others were treated around him. He looked around the cabin, observing the passengers who seemed to receive immediate attention. A young couple in the row ahead waved their hands, and a flight attendant promptly adjusted their seats. Across the aisle, an elderly man needed assistance with his oxygen mask, and the crew responded quickly. Marcus swallowed the frustration rising in his chest. He had served in the Air Force, trained to remain calm under pressure, and yet being overlooked now in this everyday setting felt strangely familiar. He reminded himself that life often required him to be patient, but even patience could be exhausting. Trying to distract himself, Marcus took out a small travel pillow and leaned against the window. The city below had disappeared into a blanket of darkness, and the plane cruised steadily above the clouds. He tried to focus on the view, letting his thoughts drift to Mia. He imagined her sprawled on the living room floor, coloring with her favorite crayons or dancing around with her stuffed animals. The mental picture brought a smile to his face, softening the edge of his irritation. Mia was his constant motivation, his reason for pushing through challenges. He clung to the thought of her warmth and innocence to center himself. Even with the distraction of his thoughts, the flight presented other small obstacles. The person in the seat next to him accidentally spilled a bit of juice on the armrest, and Marcus offered a napkin to help clean it up. While he didn't expect thanks, the lack of acknowledgement added to his sense of invisibility. These moments accumulated, reminding him that he often moved through the world unnoticed, a silent observer in spaces where others seemed to receive immediate attention. It was not bitterness that filled him, but a quiet wariness, a recognition of patterns he had learned to navigate since childhood. He tried to engage with the in-flight entertainment to take his mind off the situation. Marcus scrolled through, the movie options eventually settling on an action film he had seen before, hoping the familiarity would be comforting. The sound of the engines and the soft chatter around him became background noise as he focused on the story unfolding on the screen. But even here, the intrusion of reality reminded him of the world outside the movie. The minor inconveniences, the lack of acknowledgement, and the subtle feeling of being overlooked never fully disappeared. Marcus had developed coping mechanisms over the years: quiet endurance, calm observation, and a focus on what truly mattered. But sometimes the accumulation of small slights weighed heavily. During the mid-flight service, he tried once again to get the attention of a flight attendant, politely requesting a drink. She paused briefly, nodded, and moved on to another passenger without fulfilling his request. Marcus inhaled slowly, allowing himself a moment of internal reflection rather than frustration. He had faced far greater challenges in his life. He had flown in jets, trained under extreme conditions, and led missions where split-second decisions meant the difference between success and failure. A missed drink or a slightly stuck bag was minor in comparison. Still, he could not deny that subtle sting of being ignored, the quiet message that sometimes his presence went unnoticed. To redirect his focus, Marcus began thinking about his journey as a single father. The flight was a small obstacle compared to the everyday responsibilities he carried. He had to ensure Mia was cared for, that she felt loved and supported, and that she never doubted her worth. Parenting alone was a balancing act of discipline, nurturing, and constant attention. There were days filled with joy and laughter, and others where exhaustion pressed him down, and he questioned if he could handle it all. The strength to continue, knowing that Mia depended on him not only for care, but for emotional support and guidance. As the hours passed, Marcus reflected on his experiences in society. He had often noticed that his achievements and dedication could go unrecognized in casual social situations. Despite being a responsible father, a veteran, and a professional, there were moments when he felt invisible in everyday interactions. The flight, though minor in the scope of life, mirrored larger truths he had learned over the years. Patience and resilience were essential, and self-worth could not rely on external acknowledgement. He allowed himself to acknowledge these feelings, without dwelling on them, understanding that recognition would come in different ways, sometimes unexpectedly. Marcus noticed a few passengers glancing his way, but most were absorbed in their own activities. He thought about how appearances influenced how people treated one another. He was a black man, dressed neatly, polite, and composed. Yet these qualities alone did not guarantee attention or respect in casual settings. He had grown accustomed to this, recognizing that sometimes his contributions and presence were overlooked simply because of perception, not merit. Still, he refused to let these experiences diminish his spirit or his sense of purpose. Reaching into his bag, Marcus found a small notebook and a pen. He began jotting down thoughts and reminders, organizing his plans for the upcoming week. Writing helped him feel grounded and offered a sense of control amidst minor chaos. He wrote about Mia, her upcoming school events, and the projects he wanted to complete for work. These notes reminded him of what truly mattered: family, responsibility, and the quiet pride in meeting challenges head-on. Each word he penned reinforced his resilience and determination to remain composed, even in moments where he felt unseen. The flight continued, and Marcus allowed himself small moments of humor to lighten the mood. He imagined exaggerated scenarios, picturing a flight attendant suddenly realizing his presence and bowing dramatically, or the passengers applauding him for patience. These thoughts made him smile quietly, easing tension in his chest. Despite the small frustrations, he refused to let them overshadow the larger joy awaiting him, reuniting with Mia, sharing stories, laughter, and love that made all the challenges worthwhile. As the plane leveled out above the clouds, Marcus reclined slightly, listening to the gentle hum of the engines. He reflected on the importance of patience and the strength required to endure small slights without letting them define him. He was filled with moments of being overlooked, misunderstood, or underestimated. But he understood that these experiences did not diminish his value or the love he gave and received. He focused on the bigger picture, the bond with his daughter, the sense of accomplishment in his work. and the quiet pride in navigating life's complexities with dignity. By the midpoint of the flight, Marcus had found a rhythm he engaged with. The entertainment, wrote in his notebook, and observed the cabin without letting irritation take over. He reminded himself that the small frustrations of the journey were temporary, while the love for his daughter and the life he had built were enduring. He felt a quiet resilience settle over him, a calm understanding that he could face these challenges with patience and strength. The minor annoyances of the flight would fade in memory, but the purpose and meaning of his life as a father and professional would remain. The hours passed, lights dimmed, and passengers began to relax into the flight. Marcus leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes briefly to rest. Even though he felt unseen in small ways, he carried a deep sense of pride and responsibility. He reminded himself that recognition was not always immediate, and sometimes it came in unexpected forms. The journey continued, but Marcus maintained focus on what mattered most: the connection to his daughter, the fulfillment of his duties, and the quiet strength that allowed him to endure life's small frustrations with grace. Marcus settled into his seat, trying to let the monotony of the flight wash over him, but a quiet restlessness lingered. The minor frustrations of earlier, the ignored requests, the indifferent glances, the small inconveniences still nagged at the edges of his mind. He shifted slightly, adjusting his seatbelt, and took a deep breath, reminding himself that the journey was temporary, and soon he would be back home with Mia, to distract himself. He opened his notebook, flipping past his earlier notes and doodles. Writing had always been a comfort, a way to organize his thoughts and keep a sense of control over his busy life. As he scribbled down a few ideas for an upcoming work project, a fellow passenger, a middle-aged man sitting across the aisle, glanced at him curiously. "Air Force?" the man asked casually, nodding toward the small patch on Marcus's jacket, a subtle emblem of his past service. Marcus paused, then nodded. "Yeah, F-22 pilot, a while back," he replied modestly. The words came out almost automatically, more out of habit than pride. Being a pilot had been a defining part of his life, but in daily interactions, it was rare for anyone to recognize or acknowledge it. The passenger's eyes widened slightly. "No way. Really? That's incredible." Marcus gave a small smile, shrugging. He wasn't looking for praise, but it was rare to meet someone who understood the significance of what he had done. Conversation flowed naturally from there. The stranger asking questions about life in the Air Force, the challenges, the missions, and the discipline required. Marcus answered honestly, keeping a casual tone, but inside he felt a spark of recognition finally. Someone acknowledging a part of his identity that often went unnoticed, encouraged by the conversation. Marcus leaned back and reflected quietly. He had spent much of his life navigating spaces where he was overlooked, where polite gestures and professional achievements often failed to elicit the respect they deserved. Growing up, he had learned to carry himself with quiet dignity, to focus on actions rather than expecting acknowledgement. Being ignored was familiar, but it was also a reminder of the subtle ways bias and perception shaped experiences. Yet, moments like this conversation reminded him that recognition could come unexpectedly, and it could carry meaning beyond words. As the flight continued, Marcus's mind wandered to the concept of his call sign, Viper 47. It had been given to him during training, a symbol of his skill, precision, and dedication as a fighter pilot. To outsiders, it might sound like just a nickname, but to those who understood, it represented years of discipline, sacrifice, and accomplishment. He mentioned it casually to the passenger across the aisle. "They called me Viper 47 back in the squadron," he said, with a modest smile. The man's reaction was immediate. His eyebrows shot up and he repeated the words, almost in disbelief. "You're Viper 47? That's wow. I didn't know we had someone like that on this flight." Marcus laughed softly, a mixture of amusement and humility. It was strange how a simple phrase could shift perception. Suddenly, the casual invisibility he had felt on the plane began to fade, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement from someone who understood the significance. The conversation caught the attention of nearby passengers, and even a flight attendant paused for a moment, glancing toward Marcus with curiosity. He could sense the shift in the atmosphere, subtle but tangible. For the first time during the flight, he felt seen not just for his presence, but for his accomplishments, his identity, and his story. As the realization sank in, Marcus reflected on the strange nature of recognition. It often came not from effort or expectation, but from coincidence, chance encounters, and the willingness of others to notice. Here he was, a single father, who had spent the flight feeling ignored. And yet a few words just mentioning a call sign changed how people perceived him. It was a powerful reminder of how identity could be invisible in everyday life, yet still carry weight and meaning when acknowledged. He felt a quiet pride, but also a deep awareness of the contrast between being overlooked and being recognized. The flight attendant, now aware of Marcus's background, approached him. "Sir, thank you for your service," she said sincerely, her tone different from the indifferent glances earlier. Marcus nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without fanfare. It was not something he sought, but it mattered in that moment, the simple recognition of his dedication and sacrifice. Other passengers whispered among themselves, curiosity mixed with respect. As the quiet transformation in perception spread through the cabin, Marcus felt a warm, affirming sense that the person he was and the life he had led mattered, even in small, unexpected ways. Marcus's thoughts drifted to the broader implications of this moment. He had spent years navigating spaces where he felt invisible, yet here recognition had arrived unexpectedly, validating his experiences in a profound, almost surreal way. It reminded him that identity was complex, shaped by achievements, experiences, personal history, but often misunderstood or overlooked by casual observers. The small acknowledgement of his call sign Viper 47 carried weight far beyond the flight itself. It was a symbol of his journey, his struggles, and the quiet resilience he had cultivated over the years. He reflected on the contrast between invisibility and recognition. Thinking about Mia, he wanted her to understand that worth was not determined solely by attention or praise, but by integrity, discipline, and perseverance. And yet, he also recognized the human desire for acknowledgement. For moments where one's contributions and identity are truly seen, this fleeting interaction on the flight captured both realities, the challenge of being overlooked, and the transformative power of recognition. Marcus allowed himself a small smile, feeling both humbled and quietly empowered as the plane continued its course. Marcus felt a subtle shift in energy around him. Passengers, who had earlier been absorbed in their own worlds, now cast curious glances, some nodding respectfully. Even the crew seemed more attentive, offering small gestures of courtesy. Marcus remained composed, appreciating the attention without letting it overwhelm him. He understood that this was a moment of connection, a rare acknowledgement that transcended the ordinary flow of daily life. The sense of respect he felt was quiet but deeply meaningful. A reaffirmation of his identity and experiences. Marcus's thoughts returned to his call sign, to the time he had earned it, and to the discipline it represented. Viper 47 was more than just a nickname. It was a symbol of the countless hours of training, the sacrifices made, and the responsibilities shouldered. Sharing it aloud, even casually, had unlocked a door to understanding, bridging the gap between invisibility and recognition. It was a reminder that sometimes identity needed a moment of visibility to be fully appreciated, and that recognition, when it came, could transform ordinary interactions into meaningful ones. In that moment, Marcus felt a renewed sense of pride and clarity. He had endured a week of work, navigated the challenges of single parenthood, experienced the subtle sting of being ignored. Yet here, on this flight, his presence and achievements had been acknowledged, even if only briefly. It was a quiet victory, a reminder that perseverance, dignity, and integrity carried weight, even when not immediately recognized. He allowed himself to feel the affirmation fully, appreciating the unexpected validation that had arrived in such a simple yet profound way. As the plane moved smoothly through the sky, Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. He felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of balance restored. Life often required patience, endurance, and quiet resilience. But moments like this demonstrated the power of acknowledgement and respect. Recognition was not something to be demanded, but when it came, it could illuminate a person's experience. It's validating both struggles and achievements. Marcus carried this lesson with him, letting it settle in his mind and heart, feeling a renewed sense of purpose and connection to his identity. The hours passed, and Marcus allowed himself small moments of reflection, thinking about the impact of simple words, the recognition of effort, and the quiet pride that came from being truly seen. The flight, which had begun with minor frustrations and feelings of invisibility, transformed into a space of acknowledgement and respect. Marcus understood that identity was complex, shaped by both private dedication and public perception, and that, sometimes, recognition arrived in the most unexpected ways. He embraced this moment fully, feeling both humbled and empowered by the midpoint of the flight. Marcus had regained his composure entirely. He returned to his notebook, writing down reflections on identity, recognition, and resilience, capturing the lessons of the journey so far. The simple acknowledgement of Viper 47 had shifted his perspective, reminding him that even fleeting moments of recognition carried immense meaning. He felt a renewed connection to both his past and his present, understanding that the quiet affirmation of one's identity could illuminate the path forward, providing strength and clarity for the challenges yet to come. Marcus felt a quiet shift in the atmosphere around him. After casually mentioning his call sign, the energy in the cabin had subtly changed. Flight attendants moved with a little more attentiveness. Passengers glanced toward him with curiosity, and there was a sense of acknowledgement that had been missing before. It was a small but meaningful difference, and Marcus appreciated it, though he remained modest, quietly observing rather than seeking attention. He knew recognition could be fleeting, but even this small validation brought a sense of calm and pride. As the plane continued to cruise at high altitude, Marcus noticed a slight commotion near the cockpit door. One of the flight attendants leaned closer to speak quietly with the pilots, glancing occasionally in Marcus's direction. He couldn't hear the words, but the tone and gestures suggested that something significant had been conveyed. Marcus felt a mix of curiosity and caution. He had learned over the years that attention could be unpredictable. He didn't want to assume anything until he saw it for himself. A few minutes later, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, a routine signal for in-flight service. But then, Marcus heard an unexpected sound through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention outside the left windows. We have a special salute for a distinguished passenger on board." The voice was formal, respectful, and unmistakably sincere. Marcus froze for a moment, disbelief washing over him. A salute for him. He looked around, trying to process what was happening. Passengers began turning toward the windows. Murmuring in excitement and curiosity, Marcus walked slowly to the window, heart pounding as the plane banked gently. Outside, the sky was clear, a deep shade of navy, dotted with stars. Then he saw them two F-22 fighter jets, cutting through the sky with precision and grace. They flew in perfect formation, banking in sync, their sleek silhouettes illuminated by the fading light of the horizon. Marcus's eyes widened and his breath caught. He could hardly believe what he was witnessing. The jets performed a coordinated maneuver, a brief but unmistakable salute in the era ceremonial gesture, reserved for recognition and respect. Emotion welled up inside him. The salute was not just a nod to his military service. It was an acknowledgement of who he was, the life he had led, and the sacrifices he had made. It was as if the universe had paused for a moment to honor him, to recognize the dedication and resilience that often went unnoticed in everyday life. Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat, a mixture of pride, gratitude, and humility. He had trained with these aircraft, flown missions that demanded precision and courage, and now, years later, they were honoring him in a way that words could barely describe. Passengers around him were captivated, pointing toward the sky and whispering excitedly. Some took pictures, others simply stared in awe. The energy in the cabin had transformed into one of shared admiration and respect. Marcus stood quietly, absorbing every detail, the sound of the jets roaring through the sky, the sleek lines cutting against the night, the synchronized movements of pilots paying homage. It was a moment of pure recognition, a powerful contrast to the feelings of invisibility he had experienced earlier on the flight. As he returned to his seat, Kachis reflected on the journey that had brought him here. Just hours ago, he had been a single father, exhausted from work and travel, feeling overlooked and ignored. The small frustrations of the flight, the unattended requests, the indifferent glances, the minor annoyances had weighed on him. And yet, in a matter of moments, everything had changed. The acknowledgement from the flight crew, the recognition from passengers, and now the airborne salute from F-22 pilots had transformed the atmosphere. Turning an ordinary flight into an extraordinary experience, he felt a deep sense of connection, not just to the pilots in the sky, but to the broader story of his life. The salute represented more than military recognition. It was symbolic of resilience, perseverance, and the quiet dignity he had maintained as a single father and professional. Marcus had often felt invisible in daily life, overlooked despite his efforts and achievements. Yet this moment validated not only his service but also his identity, showing that the value of one's life and dedication could be recognized even in unexpected ways. The flight attendant returned, offering him a bottle of water with a smile. "Oh, it's our honor, sir," she said softly, and Marcus nodded, grateful but composed. He realized that recognition could arrive in many forms, through words, gestures, or even a dramatic salute in the sky. It didn't need to be sought. Sometimes it came unexpectedly, reminding one of the impact of perseverance, integrity, and dedication. Marcus reflected on how small gestures of respect could profoundly affect someone, turning moments of frustration into moments of affirmation. He leaned back in his seat, watching passengers continue to point toward the jets as they disappeared into the distance. Some were whispering to their neighbors, sharing the story of the salute. "We're so lives." And Marcus realized that this moment would ripple beyond himself. Stories would be shared. People would remember the unusual and inspiring sight. And his experience would become part of the collective memory of those on board. It was a reminder that even brief acts of recognition could leave a lasting impact. Marcus thought about Mia, imagining how he would tell her the story. He pictured her eyes widening in excitement, her little hands clapping, and her proud smile. The experience wasn't just for him. It was a memory he could share with his daughter, teaching her about courage, resilience, and the value of being seen for who she was. It was a lesson wrapped in awe and wonder, showing that hard work, dedication, and integrity could be acknowledged in remarkable ways. Sometimes when least expected, as the cabin settled back into its rhythm, Marcus allowed himself to savor the quiet after the extraordinary moment. He felt a sense of peace and fulfillment that had been missing since the flight began. The minor annoyances, the moments of being ignored, and the small frustrations now seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Their place was pride, gratitude, and a deep understanding of the importance of acknowledgement. Recognition, he realized, was not merely about ego. It was about validation, respect, and the affirmation of one's life and choices. Marcus reflected on the contrast between earlier in the flight and now. He had gone from feeling overlooked and frustrated to being celebrated in a way that was unforgettable. It was a striking reminder that moments of invisibility could suddenly shift into moments of profound recognition, depending on timing, perception, and circumstance. Life, he understood, was filled with these contrasts, and resilience required. The ability to navigate both, appreciating moments of recognition while enduring periods of being unseen. As the plane continued toward its destination, Marcus took out his notebook once more, began jotting down his reflections on the flight, the importance of patience, the power of unexpected recognition, and the profound impact of gestures of respect. He wanted to remember every detail, the sound of the jets, the awe of the passengers, and the incredible feeling of being acknowledged in such a spectacular way. These notes were not just for him. They were a record of a lesson in dignity, perseverance, and the human desire to be seen and respected. Hours into the flight, Marcus felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The experience had shifted something inside him. He understood that life would continue to present moments of invisibility and acknowledgement, frustration and celebration. F-22 salute was a rare, extraordinary instance, a but it symbolized something enduring, that dedication, service, and resilience mattered, even if recognition did not always come immediately. He embraced the memory fully, knowing it would stay with him, a source of pride and inspiration. By the time the plane began its descent, Marcus felt a renewed connection to both his past and his present. The F-22 salute had transformed an ordinary flight into an extraordinary experience, providing a sense of closure and affirmation. He thought about how he would tell the story to friends, colleagues, and most importantly, Mia. It was a story of service, recognition, and the unexpected ways life can honor dedication. Marcus leaned back in his seat, quietly proud, fully aware that this moment of acknowledgement had strengthened him, reminding him of the value of resilience, dignity, and the quiet courage required to navigate life's challenges. As the plane began its descent, Marcus felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The extraordinary experience of the F-22 salute still lingered in his mind, a vivid memory that seemed almost surreal. He could still picture the jets cutting through the sky, their sleek forms silhouetted against the darkening horizon, and moving in perfect formation, as if the world itself had paused to acknowledge him. The pride and validation he felt from that moment were powerful. But now, as the plane lowered toward the airport, his thoughts turned to the other half of his life, his daughter, Mia. He was eager to be home, to see her little smile, to hear her excited chatter, and to hold her in his arms after a week apart. The cabin had quieted down slightly as passengers prepared for landing. Some were gathering their belongings, others were gazing out the windows, still processing the incredible aerial salute they had witnessed. Marcus observed them for a moment, noticing the mix of awe, curiosity, and admiration in their expressions. It struck him that recognition, even in brief, extraordinary moments, had a way of inspiring others. He thought about the passengers who had barely known him an hour ago, people who now had a story to tell. A story about a single father, a veteran, and the unexpected way the sky itself had honored his service. The experience had changed the ordinary flight into something unforgettable, not only for him, but for everyone on board. Marcus reflected quietly on the journey that had brought him here. The week had been long, filled with work meetings, travel, and the constant worry about Mia. He had faced small frustrations on this flight, moments where he felt overlooked and invisible. It was a feeling he had grown accustomed to over the years, both in everyday life and in spaces where he had served with dedication and professionalism. Yet, the recognition he had received from the flight crew, the passengers, and finally the pilots above, reminded him that visibility and respect were not always immediately apparent, but they could arrive in unexpected ways. It was a powerful lesson about patience, dignity, and the quiet strength required to endure life's small slights as the plane descended further. Marcus glanced at the seat next to him and smiled at the person across the aisle who had first asked about his military service. "Thanks for asking about Viper 47, he said softly. The man nodded, smiling back, clearly proud to have shared in the moment of recognition with him. Marcus felt a renewed sense of connection, not only to the people around him, but to the broader community of those who had supported him in ways both visible and invisible. It reminded him that human connection, even brief, could validate experiences, uplift spirits, and make moments of struggle more bearable. He thought about Mia again, imagining how she would react when he told her the story of the F-22 salute. He pictured her eyes widening in amazement, her hands clapping, and her laughter filling the room. He wanted her to understand that recognition and respect were meaningful, but that they often came in unexpected forms. Most importantly, he wanted her to know that her worth, her effort, and her identity were never dependent on the acknowledgement of others. Even though being recognized could be powerful and affirming, the story would be more than a tale of jets in the sky. It would be a lesson about resilience, pride, and integrity. Marcus reflected on the larger meaning of the experience. For years, he had navigated life as a single father and a veteran, often feeling unseen in casual interactions. He had learned to value quiet persistence, to maintain dignity in the face of indifference, and to find strength in the knowledge that his efforts mattered even when unrecognized. The F-22 salute was a remarkable and extraordinary form of acknowledgement, but it also highlighted a truth he had always known. Recognition might not be constant, but it was meaningful when it arrived. It reaffirmed his sense of purpose, both as a parent and as a person who had dedicated years to service, discipline, and integrity. The final approach to the airport brought a sense of grounding, both literally and metaphorically. As the plane descended, Marcus felt the weight of the week, the flight, and the extraordinary experience lift slightly, replaced by anticipation and excitement. The thought of being reunited with Mia brought warmth to his chest. He could almost hear her little voice calling his name. Imagine her excited run toward him, and see her joyous expression as she wrapped her arms around his legs. The memory of the F-22 to salute, awe-inspiring as it was, now mingled with the anticipation of homecoming, the ordinary, everyday joy that made all the challenges worthwhile. As the plane touched down and taxied toward the gate, Marcus gathered his belongings, taking a moment to absorb the quiet pride he still felt. The cabin crew offered polite smiles and greetings, now with genuine warmth and attentiveness. Passengers continued to exchange excited whispers about the jets they had seen, and Marcus allowed himself a small smile. He had entered the flight feeling invisible, unnoticed, and quietly frustrated by minor slights. But he was leaving with a sense of validation, dignity, and connection that would stay with him long after the journey ended. He thought about how this experience reflected broader truths about life. There were moments when one could feel overlooked, unappreciated and invisible, even while working hard and giving one's best. But there were also moments unexpected, extraordinary, and sometimes fleeting when recognition arrived, illuminating effort, dedication, and character in ways that words alone could not capture. The F-22 to salute was such a moment. It was both literal and symbolic, reminding Marcus that perseverance, integrity, and resilience had value. Whether immediately acknowledged or not, Marcus's mind wandered to the idea of storytelling. He realized that sharing this experience with Mia, friends, and colleagues would allow others to witness the power of recognition, respect, and unexpected affirmation. It would remind them that ordinary people could live extraordinary lives, and that even small gestures of acknowledgement could have profound effects. He wanted Mia to understand that while effort and character mattered more than external validation, recognition, when it arrived, was a reminder of the impact one could have on the world and the people around them. As the passengers began to disembark, Marcus felt a renewed sense of gratitude. The flight had been more than a journey from one place to another. It had been a microcosm of life itself. Frustration, invisibility, and minor slights had been met with recognition, acknowledgement, and awe-inspiring affirmation. The experience highlighted the importance of patience, dignity, and the quiet strength required to navigate both the ordinary and the extraordinary. Marcus carried these lessons with him as he moved down the aisle, nodding to flight attendants and fellow passengers, feeling seen and connected in ways that had eluded him earlier. Finally, Marcus stepped off the plane, the cool air of the airport greeting him. He felt the weight of the past week lift, replaced by anticipation and joy. Mia was waiting for him, her small figure visible in the crowd, her arms outstretched, her excitement palpable. He broke into a run, scooping her up in his arms, feeling the warmth of her embrace and hearing her delighted laughter. In that moment, all the frustrations of the flight, the minor slights, and even the exhaustion melted away. What remained was love, pride, and a profound sense of purpose, the knowledge that he had endured, persevered, and been recognized in both extraordinary and deeply personal ways. As they walked toward the car, Marcus reflected quietly on the lessons of the journey. Life was unpredictable, full of moments of invisibility and extraordinary recognition alike. The F-22 to salute, the acknowledgement from the crew, and the respective passengers were reminders that perseverance, integrity, and service mattered. Yet the most important recognition came from the love and connection he shared with Mia, constant affirmation that no external acknowledgement could replace. The flight, the salute, and the entire journey had reinforced his understanding of life's dualities, challenge and reward, invisibility and acknowledgement, frustration and joy. By the time Marcus and Mia reached home, the night sky was deep and quiet. He set her down, listening to her chatter excitedly about her day while he unpacked his bag. He smiled, watching her animation and joy, realizing that this moment, ordinary and beautiful, was the ultimate reward. Recognition from others was meaningful and affirming, but the love of a child, the bonds of family, and the quiet pride in living with integrity were enduring and irreplaceable. Marcus felt a sense of peace, gratitude, and fulfillment that filled him completely. Knowing that the extraordinary experience of the flight had been both a lesson and a celebration, a reminder that resilience, dedication, and love would always be honored, in ways big and small, expected and unexpected.